why don't we start going around and just saying names? I'm Rabbi Blumberg. Good to be here with everyone. Laura, do you want to just introduce yourself?
Laura Moyer. Yeah.
Marnie House.
Scott Cantor.
Darryl Cantor.
Kathy Coverbies.
Lori Sassa.
Andy Miller. Marla Miller.
Wonderful. Great. While we're waiting for Andy, actually, and folks online, and I'll just say for folks online, we've got Bob Clark, Merle Kushner, Bill Rabkin, Howard Schwartz, Dan Bendel, and iPad 60 is Lynn Frank. Wonderful. This is a really lovely group, and I'm curious if folks just want to take a minute to tell me why you're here. No pressure. No pressure, just it will help me in thinking about future sessions as well, knowing that it's the Friday night service. We're looking at, like, what brought you here?
Yeah. I guess I can start.
Sure.
I really want to understand the Torah more than I do and get as much education as I can about it. So I think this is great. Just, my opinion is, as much as you learn, you can never learn enough. So
Great. Thanks, Marla.
I'm going to ditto Marla. Taking the easy way out.
oh, thanks, Carol.
Yeah, Lynn.
I was bat mitzvahed at 13. I'm now 70. And I like reviewing and refreshing because I'm a very different person than I was then. So I appreciate things in a different way, which is why I'm also taking Intro to Hebrew, just to review everything, because that's a long time ago.
Sure is. Yeah. Thanks, Lynn. That's great. That's great. Wonderful.
So for me, I feel like I can do the whole service in a rote way, but I don't necessarily know what it all means.
Great.
So
Excellent.
I think, like, spiritually, emotionally, you get so much more out of it if you know what it means. And I feel like there's certain things that I remember, and like I'm like, oh, that one sticks in my head, and like you stand up and like you feel it, and I want to maybe bring that across the rest of the service.
Yeah.
Fabulous. Great.
I'm here because I'm home here. I
Beautiful.
take every opportunity to learn whatever I can and to do whatever I can here in the community. It's just something I like doing.
Great. Thank you, Andy. That's helpful. So, anybody else want to jump in, either online or in person? Great. Wonderful. So this is the first session of 4 or 5. We'll see how things are going. But 4 or 5 till the end of the academic year, till June, that we'll be learning about the prayers of the Friday night service, and specifically how we do them here at Temple Beth Am, and maybe a little bit of why we do them the way we do them at Temple Beth Am, which is pretty similar to most Reform and even conservative synagogues that you'll see the Friday night service. But for all of the reasons that you said, and I'm really glad to hear that, because in putting together today's session, and I haven't put together the other sessions yet, I realize that there are a lot of different orientations that we can have towards looking at the Friday night service. And I'm going to be bringing a little bit of history, a little bit of learning how to navigate our prayer book, but just a little of that. A little bit of how we do it, the standing, the facing, the bowing we'll get to. Last year I did 2 sessions on the choreography of the Friday night service. And so it will just be a little tiny bit of that. But a lot of it is going to be discussion of like taking the time to look at the English of the prayers and think about what are the themes, the images, the messages that are evoked from the different prayers of the service. And I guess also in thinking about history and background of the prayers, because they often link into either biblical texts or Talmudic texts. So I bring some of those today as well. Oh, great. Phyllis is with us too. Hi, Phyllis. Good to see you. Phyllis Bendel's there. So I'm going to pass this out, and I'm putting into the chat a sheet. If you're at home, you'll want to have the Mishkan Tefillah Shabbat prayer book in front of you because we're going to be looking both at the prayer book and at the sheet that I've put into the chat or that's coming around. Oh, and part of me saying what this class is or what I'm thinking about it today is that if this was not what you expected, I do want that feedback, and I am happy to recalibrate for future sessions as well in thinking about what exactly brings people here and what's going to be most useful for you in these 4 or 5 sessions that we have on the Friday night service. Wonderful. So we will begin. Today is going to be opening prayers and Kabbalat Shabbat. So a section of the service, it's going to amount to what, time-wise in our hour-long to hour and 15-minute service is the first, I would say, 10 to 15 minutes, usually. Thank you very much. We're going to be looking at candle lighting. We'll focus on Shalom Aleichem, and then the Kabbalat Shabbat service, and we'll talk more about what all of those things are. And stop me at any time if I'm going too fast or if you need clarification on a phrase or word. But we'll jump in, and as we jump in, we'll slow down a little bit. So let's open up to pages 2 and 3. Our service usually begins with a nigun, with a wordless melody that the cantor usually starts on his guitar, and we sing often yainais, right? Just to sort of get into an intention, what's called a kavanah, to bring ourselves into the space a little bit. There are different nigunim, different of these wordless melodies that we use to sort of set different intentions, and we think about, do we want a really upbeat one this week? Do we want a more contemplative one? And it helps us sort of focus and get into the mood of the service. And then I say Shabbat Shalom, I say a word or two, and invite somebody up for candle lighting. So let's start. We're going to look at the notes for most of these prayers that are in our prayer book. So our prayer book has usually, and actually this page is a great example, pages 2 and 3. The prayer, the most traditional text of the prayer is usually on the right-hand side, or often is on the right-hand side of our Siddur, and usually more English on the left side, or an interpretive version of the prayer on the left side, sometimes also with some Hebrew of the blessing. But here you'll see, right on the left-hand side, we have these 2 readings. We usually choose one of the 2 of them to have our candle lighter read before lighting the candles, and then we light the Shabbat candles. So let's take a look at the bottom right, because there are notes on usually the bottom right of the page in our Mishkan Tefillah Siddur. Somebody want to read, just so it's not always my voice, that bottom right?
The mitzvah of kindling Shabbat lights in the home is an early rabbinic practice. The Shabbat candle blessing is first recorded in the 9th century prayer book, Siddur Rav Amran. Lighting Shabbat candles as part of the synagogue service is an innovation of Reform Judaism. Wonderful.
Thank you, Marla. So we'll look at the English of the prayer. We'll be focusing more on the English of future prayers of today's session, but just to read in the middle of the page on page 2, the English of that blessing is, "Blessed are you, Adonai, our God, sovereign of the universe, who hallows us with mitzvot, makes us holy with mitzvot, commanding us to kindle the light of Shabbat." Any thoughts about, we're not going to go probably too in depth on the prayer, but any thoughts about the English there or this prayer generally?
Well, since we're starting at the beginning, how come almost all prayers begin the same way? Baruch atah Adonai, Eloheinu melech haolam.
Yeah, that's what the rabbis decided a couple thousand years ago, and that's how we do it.
You have no insight into their decision.
Not off the top of my head in terms of like why exactly those words. It's worth spending some time, there's some interesting second person, third person ideas, right? Like, blessed are you.
Aleinu does not begin that way, for example.
And we'll get to Aleinu.
Right.
Aleinu is a very different kind of prayer. And so in our probably fourth session, we'll get to Aleinu and talk about it a little bit more. Yeah.
I have a question.
Oh, hold on one second. Scott,
okay.
And then Lynn.
I'm thinking that both the lights symbolically and the language that's repetition, that it sets an intention of communion with God. And so the two processes of that allows people to get into the feeling right
Beautiful.
off the bat.
Wonderful. Yeah. Great. Thanks, Scott. Yeah, Lynn. Oh, hold on. We're going to go to Lynn.
I had a question that it says lighting the candles as part of the service is an innovation of Reform Judaism. What do they mean by innovation?
Fabulous question. Hold on to that for a second, because we're gonna look at that on our sheet in just a moment.
Okay.
It was also probably in ancient times or Middle Ages a very practical matter, because once the sun had set, it was Shabbos, and you couldn't light candles. If you wanted any light in the house, you had to do it before sunset.
That's right. Yep. The Shabbat candles were for a practical reason as well, not just to enjoy their light, right? On Hanukkah, we don't use the light from the candles for anything except to enjoy them. For Shabbat, there actually is a practical reason that they help light, especially when they were, like you say, the only lights maybe that you had for Shabbat. Great. So let's take a look at the first piece here. It's from My People's Prayer Book. I want to just mention these are sort of my go-to. There's a set, I think, of 10 of them of this My People's Prayer Book for different, and I only brought 2 of them because today I quote from 2 of them, the Kabbalat Shabbat service and Shabbat at home. There's, as I said, 10 volumes, one specifically on the Shema and blessings around it, one on the Amidah, one on all the different services, and gives a lot of background, sort of lots of different types of commentaries on each of the blessings. So they have, for each blessing, they have different contributors who focus on sort of a different orientation. So, where is it? Hold on. I'll just say one focuses on history, one focuses on translation, one focuses on halakha, Jewish law, and how the prayer fits into that. One focuses on the Talmud, one focuses on theology, one focuses on biblical connections, and one is a woman's voice. And that's for this one. Some of them also have Hasidic connections and things like that. But in any case, this first quote and several of our quotes today are from here. So here's what it says. It says, although part of the traditional Jewish home ritual for Shabbat, this blessing appears in no Reform prayer books of the 19th century, because these books were principally intended for synagogue, not home-based use. By 1921, however, the balance between synagogue and home liturgy was shifting in favor of the synagogue, where a late Friday night service was becoming the norm. So much that rabbis, and that's my mistake there in copying it over, that rabbis wanted to begin it in the same way that Shabbat was begun at home, with the lighting of candles. This, Lynn, I think is your question, the Reform innovation, not lighting candles generally, that's been done for a couple thousand years, but that was done at home, and people would come to the synagogue and pray the service. No candles were to be seen, no candles as part of the service. It's a Reform innovation to light the candles together to start the service, as if it were sort of being done at home. And that's sort of a Reform tradition as well, is bringing more of the home rituals into the synagogue. Any thoughts or questions about that?
The candles are supposed to be lit at sundown or just before sundown.
Yes, in an 18-minute period before sundown,
right,
generally.
Which means that people can't do it both at home and in the synagogue unless they lived within 18 minutes of the synagogue. One of them would have to be done either before or after the specified time period.
Right. So as a non-halachic denomination, that's not a concern necessarily for us in the Reform movement, right? If in winter sundown is 3:54 p.m., whatever it is, and our service starts at 7:15, that's when we light candles as a community. If a person had already lit at home, they would not say the blessing again when they came to the synagogue, if that makes sense. Yeah.
I had a thought about that to be able to gather in the synagogue implies some kind of safety in the community versus just solely worshiping and lighting candles at home. That you can do it kind of out in public.
And you said, did you say safety as part of that, Merle?
Yeah. Like that there's actually a synagogue where people can go and gather and do these things.
Yeah, beautiful, right? It's not confined to the home. And I think of it, right, also as, if this was something that you're doing with your family, you're now doing it with your community. It's sort of expanding the circle a little bit in a beautiful way. Thank you. Great. Any other thoughts about candle lighting? So that's how we generally start our service.
I sometimes think that we need a class in candle lighting given by a Boy Scout. So many people have trouble lighting the candles.
Yeah.
As a former Boy Scout, let me put in 2 clues. The hottest part of the fire is the top of the dark cone inside, the very tip. If you're a Girl Scout, you probably knew that. All right. And so it's probably easier to light the candles if you pick up the candle stick itself and hold it over the shamus that you're lighting it from. That way the flame will hit the wick. The hottest part of the flame will hit the wick. A lot of people everybody holds it the other way.
Right.
And when it doesn't seem to work, they push it in farther, and they're in danger of putting out the shamus before the dry wick ignites. If you do it the other way, because the tip of the flame, which is always going up, is the hottest part, it'll light almost instantly.
Interesting. Yeah, we use the shamash as if it were sort of a match to light the candles. We don't usually move the candles themselves.
Yeah. You just have to be careful when you tip it not to drop the candle. Right,
exactly. And I know that ours are not stuck in very well that way, whereas the shamash is a bit more stuck in. Yeah.
That was sort of a footnote on the footnotes.
Right. I do feel I was going back and forth whether to include this as part of the sheet, and I decided not to, because we did it as part of the choreography class last year. But I do want to mention that you'll often see people, right, we light and then say the blessing, whereas usually when we do a mitzvah, we say the blessing immediately prior to doing the action. For actually halachic reasons, Jewish law reasons, we light the candle first and then say the blessing. But you'll notice sometimes people will either bring in the light and cover their eyes, or just cover their eyes when reciting the blessing. The idea is that we are covering our eyes as if we hadn't yet lit the candles. And when we uncover our eyes, we see that the candles are lit. It's as if we had said the blessing and then done the mitzvah, which is generally how things are done. If you were to say, when you say the blessing, immediately after saying the blessing, Shabbat is, you're taking on Shabbat to say that Shabbat is here. And for especially those who are observant, wouldn't light something afterwards, right? Wouldn't light a candle afterwards. So this was sort of a way to get through that, which was to light it first, pretend you hadn't lit it yet, uncover your eyes, and there it is after saying the blessing. So that's why you'll see folks cover their eyes sometimes as part of that.
Thank
And
you.
is there-
That was, sorry.
Is there any significance? Like I know people do different things with their hands.
Right. Yeah, I sort of bringing in the light of Shabbat. Sometimes people do 3 of them and then bring it in, or not to do that, or just one, or none. Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
I was just saying that's a great explanation, because sometimes I tend to do it and sometimes I don't. And it's more I guess I never really understood why. I was just kind of following tradition.
Right.
Thank you, because that's a great explanation. I was, I never knew what to do.
Right.
Yeah.
And I on the Bima, I usually follow the custom of whoever is lighting the candles. So we don't always do it, but it's worth teaching a little bit, and then people can, decide what they want to do for themselves. Yes, Scott.
Would you characterize the covering of the eyes as some form of humility before God?
Great question. It seems like you might. Will you tell us a little bit more about it?
Yeah, you're celebrating the presence of God communally amongst all of us, and to do so it's a big step. And we are much, as an individual, we're very small, and as a community, we're a bit bigger, but we're still smaller than God. So by doing that, I think it's just a nice way of showing respect.
Beautiful. Yeah, I love that. I think drawing inward a little bit, right? Covering and thinking of ourselves as humble, small, and then coming out and being in community, being in sort of a different time, recognizing that that's sort of how we think about the beginning of Shabbat. I don't know. I always take a big breath out when I look at the candles after saying the blessing, because it brings us into a different time.
Another question. So, upon what Scott said, so I've noticed that you'll cover your right eye, and other people cover both. Okay, so the significance is the right eye, because everything with God's one is more with the right hand, but I noticed both. Is there one is better than the other? Are they both equally right, or
you're saying I do right hand?
Yeah, you usually do.
Oh, really?
Yeah, you usually do it with the right. And then I've noticed other people do it with both.
Oh, maybe I'm holding my. I might be holding my Siddur in the other hand.
Oh, okay. I was wondering if there was...
Otherwise, I would use both.
Yeah, I was just curious about that.
So, isn't that amazing, right? Isn't it amazing that that this is sometimes how customs develop too, right? We learn that we cover it with the right hand. Our ancestors have been covering with their right hand forever. Really, it's just they were holding their Siddur in the other hand.
Okay. Oh, that's why, because I was wondering why it was both. So this is great for this.
Fabulous.
That's a Latin tradition. The left is sinister.
Well, and right, there is a Jewish idea that the strength is in the right, or that the right. Has. But yeah.
If I forget Jerusalem, let my right hand resist cunning.
That's right. Yeah.
Yeah. There's a third option for lighting the candles, and which I use during Hanukkah, and I'm not sure why. Like covering your right eye. I sing the songs and say the prayers while I'm lighting the candles. All right.
Well, and for Hanukkah, there are different customs as to when exactly to light the candles and when to say the blessings. Some say the first blessing of Hanukkah candle lighting, and then will light while reciting the second. Some say both blessings before doing any of the lighting. But usually it's light for Shabbat, light, cover, pray, say the blessing, and then uncover. Yeah. All right, let's keep moving. Let's keep moving. We're going to move to Shalom Aleichem. Shalom Aleichem is on page 24. You'll notice that's a big leap, and we're going to then go back to, we're going to go back again. So it's a little bit out of place, but we often like to have a sort of an opening prayer or song as part of the service just after candle lighting. Sometimes it's Shalom Aleichem. Sometimes it's Yadid Nefesh, which I chose not to bring today, but I wanted to focus on Shalom Aleichem a little bit. Let's look at the bottom right on page 24. The Shalom Aleichem, a 17th century Shabbat table song, so set around the table generally as Nira, probably composed under the influence of Lurianic Kabbalah, which is especially related to Rabbi Isaac Luria from 16th century Tzfat in northern Israel. We'll talk about that more in a little bit. But it alludes to Shabbat 119b. That's a Talmudic passage that we're going to look at in a second, which states that two angels accompany each person home from the synagogue as Shabbat begins. Would someone like to read the English for us of Shalom Aleichem?
Peace be to you, O ministering angels, messengers of the Most High, Majesty of majesties, Holy One of blessed. Enter in peace, O messengers of peace, angels of the Most High, Majesty of majesties, Holy One of blessing. Bless me, bless me with peace, O messengers of peace, angels of the Most High, Majesty of majesties, Holy One of blessing. Depart in peace, O messengers of peace, angels of the Most High, Majesty of majesties, Holy One of blessing.
Great, thanks, Laura. And just so to make sure we're all recognizing the prayer, this is Shalom Aleichem, Malachei Hasharet, Malachei Elyon, Mi'ini Melech, Malachei Hamelachim, Right, that's just so we recognize it. And each of the lines, you'll notice, or each of the verses, I guess you could say, just changes one word, the first word of each of the three following verses. Boachem l'shalom, come in peace. Barchuni l'shalom, bless me with peace. And seitchem l'shalom, depart in peace. So before we discuss it at all, I'd like us to look back on the sheet, and we'll look at the passage from the Talmud. This is Shabbat, the volume of the Talmud that deals with Shabbat. Talmud was completed around 500 CE. This is from the Babylonian Talmud, completed in Babylonia. Rabbi Yossi Bar Yehuda says, two ministering angels accompany a person on Shabbat evening from the synagogue to their home. One good angel and one evil angel. And when one reaches their home and finds a lamp burning and a table set and their bed made, the good angel says, may it be God's will that it shall be like this for another Shabbat. And the evil angel answers against his will, Amen. And if the person's home is not prepared for Shabbat in that manner, the evil angel says, may it be your will that it shall be so for another Shabbat. And the good angel answers against his will, Amen. This is possibly the origin of this blessing, again from 17th century, probably Tzfat. I was reading actually in My People's Prayer Book that it might actually have referred to other angels at one point, but this is sort of the closest story that we could say that connects the two. I'm curious if, for those especially who weren't familiar with this story, I don't know if it changes the way we think about Shalom Aleichem, or what that does for you.
My initial thought is that though Shabbat is a time for rest, you don't get a break from maybe facing like moral dilemmas. You can have temptations or whatever, good or bad, have to make decisions. So, you've got the evil angel and the good, they're there on your shoulder, ministering all through Shabbat.
Right. Well, and it's interesting that we say then in the prayer, Seitchem l'shalom, go in peace, right? That they come in, and I think of them as coming in and checking in on each one of us. I say this sometimes as part of the service too. I'll say, we invite the angels in, and then to check in on our holy community and go on their way to check in on the other holy communities. It's a little Santa Clausy, I know, but I don't know. To me, there's some beauty to it. What's that?
Like Elijah at Passover.
That's better. That's better. Much better than my Santa Claus.
Well, I just read this and I'm like, oh my gosh, like another thing to be worried about, that like my house is clean enough for Shabbat.
Right. Right. Yeah. Yeah, right. It sort of it can cut both ways, right? Like, oh, how beautiful, we've prepared for Shabbat. Shabbat is here, and then like, oh, is it nice enough for the angels to come in and give me a blessing? Like, yeah, and it's not always easy to get everything ready for Shabbat in that way.
It's tied in with the two angel theory. I mean, the good angel says, it's wonderful that you're concerned about your house on Shabbat, and the bad angel says, how great she worries about her house.
Is it bad that the angel, like, vision I'm getting is like the angel devil from Animal House? Like, that's my first vision.
Right. I was going with Looney Tunes, but same
yeah, look.
How come we sing it as a closing hymn so often Saturday morning?
Shalom Aleichem?
Yeah.
We don't usually. We sing.
Well, not usually, but it's one of the things we will frequently sing.
Oh, it's a nice one. It's a nice one.
Especially if somebody's leaving to go on a trip.
Right, right.
When Jane leaves for Germany,
yeah.
Sing Shalom Aleichem.
Oh, that's very nice, right? And actually, I was thinking also, when you come into Jerusalem, you see Boachem l'shalom, come in peace. And on the other side, you see Seitchem l'shalom, go on your way in peace, which is a resonance for this. Kathy, to speak to your point, I think about that a lot too, which is like I so want my house to be clean, my bed to be made, like my kids' toys to be picked up for Shabbat. And I walk in a lot of Shabbat evenings and it's not that way. And I try to let go as much as I can. And I have I'll be honest, I have a very hard time with it. Like I have an idea of what I want Shabbat to look like. And I think about, we think sometimes about there's Jerusalem Shel Mala and Jerusalem Shel Mata. There's like this angelic, perfect idea of what Jerusalem is. And then there's like the city, Jerusalem, where there's municipal trash pickup and sometimes they go on strike and like, like the reality. And I think of Shabbat in the same way, which is we're doing our best. We have this ideal of what we hope and we want Shabbat to look like, and we work towards it as much as we can. And like sometimes we have to let it go for the reality too. And this doesn't help, right? This story doesn't always help us in that way.
All the things in the story though that they talk about about making a house be to the liking of the good angel for Shabbat are things that involve the labor of people but don't involve the presence of people, right? Like the clean table, the made bed, but there may be but to your point about like the kids' stories, like there's no kids there, there aren't people there even eating and making dishes, and so it's like the versus once you put people in,
right, yeah.
I have a question.
Go ahead, Andy. Let them go first.
Go ahead, Howard.
What bothers me with this passage is there's no repercussions for the evil angel. I mean, if your house is not prepared, what are the repercussions of it? Basically, you're going to go the next week, and it could be the same. And if it continues, then Shabbat is lost on this family.
But is it though? In that part of the point of our discussion, that it's you may not have the reality, the perfect, tidy, clean house, but the people being ready for Shabbat, that it's more important. Like you can have Shabbat in, as part of you, as part of your spirit, I guess, and not have the perfectly clean house.
I have a question. So in reality, people work is it more important to go to temple or to have a clean house? You know, because if you can't do both, what does this say?
That's a fabulous question.
I'm reminded of the rabbinic saying that says it is not incumbent upon you to finish the task, but neither are you free to desist from it. You must make the effort, but if you have to go to shul,
Rabbi, can you hear me okay?
I like that. I like that. Yeah, Dan.
Do what you can.
Oh, okay. So I'm studying the text that you have here, and it says 2 angels accompany you home from the synagogue. A good angel and an evil angel. And one could also look at that and say, Shabbat has begun. You have a choice to, I'm not sure where I'm going with this, that you're returning from services with good and or bad intent for Shabbat and or for the rest of the week. And those 2 angels on your shoulder are battling against each other for which one will you follow for this week? Will you follow the good angel and do good things, or will you be following the evil angel? And it's that battle of good and evil in each of us, that the way that I read it when I first read the passage more succinctly, that it is an internal struggle within yourself. Is there something to that?
That it's more an internal struggle than it is an external angelic.
Right. Something. Are you going to take care of your home and other people? In the abstract, they're referencing 3 things. Is the home, is your bed made? Is there a meal cooked? Is there a lamp? But those are 3 out of hundreds of things that you could and or have done during the week before, during Shabbat and in the week to come. Why just mention those 3 things? If it wasn't a reference to all of the other things that it could represent.
Right. Yeah. It's interesting that those are the 3 sort of very, very strong physical manifestations of Shabbat practice, right? A table, because there's a Shabbat meal, a candle burning, because you lit candles before you went to the synagogue, to tie back into, our first prayer. And your bed is made, which I'm not sure totally what to make of that.
When it's all neat and comfy,
right?
Versus like on Shabbat getting into an unmade bed,
right? Yeah. It's
just symbolic of the house being tidy. You're not coming home to a mess,
right?
And that idea of like symbolically your house physically being ready, like, do they mention that because that's something that we can all relate to? Is like, are you actually supposed to be thinking about having a clean mind and like going to temple to be able to like put your work week behind you and like be able to be there for the weekend of peace and rest? Because I feel like usually we say the work week ends, the home work begins. Like, I feel like my house is the messiest on Fridays because I tidied on Saturdays.
Right.
Like, are we supposed to be reminded on Saturdays you're actually just supposed to rest, and that's why we go to temple?
Right. I think that there's something here, right? There's a reminder here that it takes a lot of work to get ready for Shabbat, which is a day of rest, right? It's like, I think about it in terms of getting ready to go on vacation. Like, you want to go on vacation and you want to go and rest, but you have to go buy everything and pack and do all the laundry and do everything so that you can get to that point. And I think this is a reminder that Shabbat is about that as well. And what does that mean for us in a modern world where, like, many of us are probably not getting home until evening time on Friday and just can't figure out how to make it work right before Shabbat actually starts. And it's a reminder. I like, Andy, what you said about, it's not incumbent upon you to complete the task, but you gotta get it started thinking about, well, what's one thing that I can do to work towards that. I also think about.
I won't take credit for it being original, but
No. Well, I think about the angels and the amen. You know, saying amen is. I think about mitzvah goreret mitzvah, which is one mitzvah leads to another, and avera goreret avera. That one, I'll say, sin, transgression leads to another. That it can be very easy to sort of, you know, fall off the wagon when it comes to getting ready for Shabbat. And I think that's what the angels are saying here too, which is, you know, may it be the same next week. It's pretty likely that whatever it looks like this week is going to be what it looks like next week, unless you make a major change or commit to making a major change for the next week.
Yeah, I just have a question just with this Shalom Aleichem and the angels and going back to your house and all that, and the way we have services here at 7:15.
Yeah.
So like if we have services here and you eat dinner before you go to services, you're coming home from work and you're eating, and then you're going to services. Our services are 7:15. Then you're not getting home until 8:30 or 8:45. But then you're walking in and your house is probably already have dishes.
Right.
Because you've eaten before temple. So what would be the fix for
earlier services, I guess, would be the fix.
Yes.
Solution.
Paper plate. Well, and I know, I mean, since I've been here, there haven't been major discussions about timing of services, but I know that often 7:15 is kind of the earliest to make sure that people can get home. Not everybody's even eaten yet necessarily. I know that a lot of folks go home and eat after our service. But it's worth thinking about.
Yeah.
Growing up in a conservadox home back in New Jersey, the women did not go to shul.
That's right.
They stayed home.
You're right.
And they took care of the home, so there was no conflict. Right. The men went to shul and the women took care of the home.
Yeah, I think that's very much here too, which is the idea of shalom bayit, of peace in the house, which these especially, you know, probably making the bed and making sure the table's set in the time of the Talmud. Certainly that was something that the wife was staying home and doing, right? And
it's a shame, Rabbi, that doesn't carry on to this generation.
Well, I'm grateful that we don't always think of it that way anymore, and that we have lots and lots of different models for how we can share, family and home activities. But I think that, Sue, I think that's really important to remember. You know,
truth be told, my bed is never made, but I'm in shul every Friday night.
Well, and it's worth mentioning that in Orthodox Judaism, in particular, women are not required to pray in the way that men are, and so it's an obligation, right? It's a religious obligation for the man to be at the synagogue, and it's not a religious obligation for a woman to be at synagogue.
It's almost what I was about to say, that we've changed our concept of what Shabbos is supposed to be. Sorry, my Ashkenazic is showing through. Shabbat is supposed to be. It was once an obligation. You went to the synagogue as an obligation on Shabbat, and women could be excused from that because they had other obligations at home. Today we view going to the temple on Shabbat as a pleasure. You know, we go to enjoy Shabbat. And it seems cruel to have the woman stay home and take care of the house while you go to enjoy Shabbat.
I'm curious what other folks think about that. Is it a pleasure? I'm really thinking about that. A pleasure to come to services as opposed to perhaps a religious obligation or something else.
I think it's all of that, and I mean, I just be honest. I get home probably 5:30 or 6, and sometimes it feels like one more thing.
Yeah.
But it's all of that. It's a pleasure and an obligation, and yes,
right. Well, and Shabbat doesn't have to look one way, right? Shabbat is not necessarily like you go to synagogue and you have this kind of meal. Like it's a set apart day, and it's a special day. And I think especially in Reform Judaism, we think about it in lots of different ways that Shabbat can look. And for some of us, that's going to mean maybe having a dinner where everybody sits down at the table at the same time, which might not have happened in the last 6 days before, or going around and saying something special about our week, right? Or maybe it's that we light candles and everybody goes their own way and is doing their own thing, but that's how we know in our family we start Shabbat together, right? And there's not one right way. That's not how we think of it. And we make those choices. Yeah.
I think it almost dates back to Breshit. I mean, it says on the seventh day God rested. God's all powerful. He doesn't have to rest. He wasn't tired out by whatever he did. I think what God did was he stopped, assessed, and appreciated what he had done.
Right.
And we do the same.
That's right. God did not have to rest. God chose to rest, and that teaches us something.
Yeah,
that certainly teaches us something. And God does it for refreshment, as we say in Vishamru. Yes, Scott.
The important word shalom that is repeated 4 times in the Shalom Aleichem. And then with the evil and the good angel, it seems to be a contest of the individual person to have the search for peace as a paramount feeling at Shabbat. I think the search for peace is emphasized greatly, that it's a contest between oneself and their own weaknesses.
Beautiful. Yeah, that peace, for sure. Yeah, Marla.
I think when coming from another perspective is, for me, in being retired, it's so much easier to basically, if you have things ready. I mean, you're not running from work, and you can have meals. But to me, it's community and celebrating. It's a pleasure for me to attend Friday night services. It's not for me. Well, for me, it's not an obligation. I mean, it's part of being community, part of praying together, and part of something that I really feel that I choose and want to do.
Thank you. I'm not sure we did justice to Howard. Are you still here, Howard? Yeah. Howard said something about repercussions for the bad angel early. It was a little while ago, and I'm still, that's sitting with me a little bit. I think of this prayer, especially knowing that it's more of a Shabbat table song, and then we bring it into the synagogue. I think of it as, hey, look at this beautiful thing our community is doing, whether we're on Zoom or in person, that we're choosing to be together, no matter what our home looks like, no matter what our bed looks like, that we've chosen to be together and to bring in Shabbat with one another. I think we'll leave Shalom Aleichem here. It's very interesting. This was a very philosophical Shabbat conversation that we had that Shalom Aleichem brought on, and this story, I think, in particular. But it makes me think about future opportunities for us to have these kinds of discussions as well.
I think it's the table that inspires us, because it does it every Saturday morning. We have the same situation.
Yeah. Or maybe it's the people and the community and the feeling. All right, so let's go. We're going to go to page 12 now. So page 12 is the beginning of Kabbalat Shabbat. We're going to read the note, just the first note at the bottom of the page that says Kabbalat Shabbat, which means welcoming Shabbat, is one of the ritual innovations of the circle of Kabbalists, Jewish mystics, who gathered around Rabbi Isaac Luria in 16th century Tzfat in the land of Israel. Kabbalat Shabbat, this service that we're going to be looking at for today, and we'll need to finish it next time too, is sort of an extra service as part of the Friday night service. Generally, there's, right, in the morning we have the Shacharit service, that is the morning service. In the afternoon, there's the Mincha service, which is the afternoon service. And then there's Ma'ariv, which is the evening service. The prayers that we're talking about and the opening prayers that we've been looking at are not yet part of the Ma'ariv service, which is sort of the core part of the service. This Kabbalat Shabbat service was an innovation of the Kabbalists starting in 16th century Tzvat. And it primarily, just looking at my notes, so it primarily consists of psalms, which we'll talk about more in a minute, and the Lachadodi prayer, which is also a Kabbalistic prayer as well. And yes, and it's its own service. So before we go further, I want to go back to our source sheet. This is also from my People's Prayer Book. Kabbalat Shabbat was originally intended as an introduction to a similarly orchestrated whole, the evening service of Friday night. That's the Ma'ariv service. But it eventually surpassed that secondary role to take on a standalone life of its own. Not in theory, of course. It was meant only to introduce what follows, nor even in practice. Jews who come for Kabbalat Shabbat stay for the rest of the service, but in the way it is experienced and therefore generally thought about. It speaks a message that has come to overshadow the Ma'ariv service that it once just introduced. That's in some communities. I would say that that we still give a lot to the Ma'ariv service, but there are communities where it's really, really about Kabbalat Shabbat and the singing of psalms up to Lachadodi, and then you kind of quickly go through the Ma'ariv service and the prayers and the Amidah afterwards. What we're going to do is look at some of these psalms. So I want us to now go back, and I'm sorry, we're kind of jumping around a lot, but to go back to the second note at the bottom of page 12. We're going to be looking at Psalms 95 through 99 and Psalm 29. It says, this cycle of 6 psalms, representing the 6 days of creation, enjoins all creation to sing out the praises of God. God's creative power is revealed in the world around us. God's sovereignty is over all nature and all nations. So here's what I'm going to encourage you to do after I say a word about Psalms. Sorry. I want to say a word about Psalms. Psalms were written, Jewish tradition says they were written by King David, which is around 1000 BCE. In reality, they were probably written between 1000 BCE and 500 BCE, certainly by different authors. They are poems and songs of praise. Some of them have sort of a preamble to them that says this was recited in the temple by the priests, or this was recited at certain times, or this is for a certain person. There are 150 psalms altogether. They're found in the Hebrew Bible at the beginning of the writings section of the Hebrew Bible, the Ketuvim. That's the K part, or the Ch part of Tanakh is the Ketuvim, the writings. And so we're going to look at 6 of them now. You'll see on the sheet that I've asked you, with a chavruta, a learning partner, I want you to read through those 6 psalms on pages 12 through 19 and discuss the questions. What themes do you notice throughout the psalms? What kind of mood do you think these psalms are meant to evoke as we begin Shabbat? And what short catchphrase or slogan would you give maybe to the whole section? We're going to try and be real tight with this. We're going to take, let's say, 7 minutes to, 7 to 10 minutes to join with somebody else. I'm going to invite the folks who are here on Zoom with us to unmute and to be one group together. Otherwise, let's try and find one other person one other person to do some learning with. I'm going to mute this so that we don't hear you. But you can talk on Zoom. We'll talk here, and then we'll come back together and finish up today. They are on pages 12 through 19 of the Siddur. just to say a discussion that came up here was, especially on page 14 of the Siddur, the idea that felt problematic for some, for God is coming to rule the earth. God will rule the world justly and its people in faithfulness. That became a bit of a discussion here around the table, which we are tabling for now, but which felt important and difficult in reciting those words in a world where we don't always see that the world is ruled in a just way. Curious what came up for folks online. Any themes or any ideas that came out of looking at these Psalms?
Yeah, I mean, I think the one question I have is it's pretty clear that the first four, 95, 96, 97, 98, 99, actually, the first five, excuse me, explain joyously by singing the praises of God. Where did 29 come from? Why is that, clearly in praise of David? Now, if you said that it was possible that David wrote the Psalms, did he write this one for himself? I somehow doubt that, but I was hoping you might speak to that unique aspect of Psalm 29 versus.
Sure, that it starts specifically with a Psalm of David. Yeah, so sometimes these we'll have these ascribed specifically to say that they are a Psalm of David, meaning written by David, not necessarily for David, if that makes sense. Does that?
Oh, okay, I got you. Okay, so the word "of" is not. I'm using that improperly.
No, it's just confusing. It's
okay, but it does stand out. It does stand out very differently from the first five, and that its sort of tone is radically different than the rest. All five of the previous ones sing the praises of Adonai. This one is different. That's all. I'm just curious if, why we do 95, 96, 97, 98, 99, and then 29.
Right. I know. I was trying to find how they decided that they would do 5 in a row and then go back to 29. And I haven't found the answer. In some ways, Psalm 29 feels very different. I hear Dan, what you're saying there, and I think in some ways it also carries over the themes of establishing God as ruler and thinking about the way God works in nature. The voice of Adonai is over the waters. The God of glory thunders over the mighty waters, breaks cedars. All of these images of nature here.
And the enthronement, right?
Right. Yeah, the enthronement. God is, which we just talked about the other night, is like kind of problematic. But God as ruler and divine power over all.
You heard what Marla and I were talking about on the side here because you're so close to us. But I saw progression through the Psalms that reflects the conversation we had a little earlier about 2 reasons for Shabbat. One is to enjoy it, and one is it's an obligation. I mean, the first one starts off as we come to the temple for pleasure. Let's sing a song, shout for joy, etc. The second one talks about our obligation. God created everything, and we owe him a lot because of everything because of that. The third one sort of merges the two. It goes back to singing again, and then it says it goes back to singing and therefore the obligation. The fourth one talks about the fact that everybody should do this, not just us. We look forward to the day like Oleno when the whole world will come to recognize the obligation and the joy. In this case, it's Shabbat. And then it talks about, I forget where, the reward and punishment. What will happen if you don't, and what will happen if you do. Interesting. All right. I didn't quite get to the very end, sorry.
That's okay. And that's what we were just talking about, is that it's sort of felt different, is what Dan was saying. Feels a bit different as this Psalm of David, and also carries over some of those themes of God's enthronement, God's power in the world. We're gonna wrap up by saying, I want to make sure to say a few things. What we choose to do here at Temple Beth Am, we usually do one psalm as part of Kabbalat Shabbat instead of the 6 psalms, the sort of cycle. So we choose, one, and especially recognizing that there are a lot of similar themes between them. We feel comfortable with that, and also I think there's real beauty in thinking about these 6 psalms as the 6 days of creation, the 6 days of, bless you, of work also that we do in the world, right? God's creation of the world mirrors in a very small way, in a very different way, but how we interact with the world today in our work with 6 days and then the 7th day being Shabbat. I was reminded of a passage that I often come back to, and it's good timing. I want to close with this. This is from The Sabbath by Abraham Joshua Heschel, a favorite of mine, but just thinking about this idea of creation, and to go back a little bit to sort of the philosophy of Shabbat piece of what we're doing together. So here's what he writes. The meaning of the Sabbath is to celebrate time rather than space. 6 days a week, we live under the tyranny of things of space. On the Sabbath, we try to become attuned to holiness in time. It is a day on which we are called upon to share in what is eternal in time, to turn from the result of creation to the mystery of creation, from the world of creation to the creation of the world. I was really struck by that here, and thinking about going back to creation imagery for the Psalms, and wanted to end with that today. Next time, which is March, I want to say 19th, we'll pick up with Lecha Dodi and the ending Psalms of Kabbalat Shabbat, and then we'll begin the Ma'ariv service. Again, I am very much soliciting feedback on today's session. I will tweak based on some of the conversation that we've had today, thinking about moving forward, but it's been really, really fruitful and really wonderful.
I almost had a laugh when I read the last question on here. What short catchphrase or slogan would you give this section? Cantor Sheckman used to refer to it as foreplay.
Oh, nice. I love that. Hey, la 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 la.